Everyone, this is David Young with DY Wood Carving, and I want to start off today by asking you a question. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever been watching a YouTube video and thought to yourself, how does that knife just glide through that wood so easily? Maybe you've thought that on one of my videos. Maybe you've watched it on other videos and you think to yourself, my cuts aren't clean like that. My knife doesn't glide so easily through that wood. What's the problem? It's a common question to ask. Or maybe it happens like this. Maybe you finish the project watching the video, carving along, or finishing the article, and you look at it and you think, this doesn't look like the one that I saw. I've got all these wood fuzzies in there. I've got all these things that aren't clean, splintering wood, and you think to yourself, why aren't my cuts like those ones that I've seen on the video? It's a common question to ask if you're a beginner, and it might take a few different forms. So you might think, is it the knife? Is the knife the problem? Is it the wood? Maybe the wood's the problem. Or maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem. So this is a video I've been thinking about in my head for quite a while and wanting to talk about. There's all sorts of questions wrapped up in here, but today I'm going to give you kind of a framework to think about this question. Why aren't my cuts as clean as they want to be? And is it the knife? Is it the wood? Or is it me? So let's think about that. And the way I'm going to think about that is I'm going to give you a framework to consider. I'm going to give you a Venn diagram. Bet you didn't think when you clicked on this video you were going to get a Venn diagram. But you need three things essentially to make clean cuts, right? You're going to need a sharp knife, you're going to need a good piece of wood, and you're going to need experience, right? And if you have those three things, you're going to be sitting right here in the middle of this diagram where all of this intersects. You're going to have a sharp knife, good wood, and experience, and you're going to be able to make those clean cuts. You're going to make those big clean cuts and feel good about it, right? Which means that if you're not getting clean cuts, you're somewhere out here, right? So let's think about what that looks like. So let's say you have a sharp knife and your wood is good, but you don't have a lot of experience. You might be living in this area, right? That would mean that what you're missing is experience, okay? Let's say that you've got a lot of experience. Your wood is good, but your knife is not sharp. You might be struggling to make clean cuts, and that would mean that if you're in this zone, that your knife is the problem, right? Well, let's say you're over here. You've got a sharp knife, you've got a lot of experience, but man, you're struggling. That means that your wood is probably the problem, right? Or you might be living up here. You might have a sharp knife, but have no experience or not enough experience, and your wood might be bad. Or you might be living down here. You might have good wood, but your knife might not be sharp. You might not have enough experience. Or you might be down in this zone. You might have experience, but even an experienced carver will be aware if they don't have a sharp knife and don't have good wood, and they could even struggle with making clean cuts, right? Now the challenge is, if you're a beginner carver, that it's difficult to know, is this where I'm at? Is this where I'm at? Maybe I'm in here. Maybe I'm in here. Maybe I'm in here. I don't really know. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to take each one of these sections and talk about, is it my knife? Is it the wood? Or is it me that's the problem? And then we will come back to look at some potential solutions. All right, so first question we're going to ask is my knife the problem? And let's try to think that through, identifying if your knife is the problem. And of course, the first thing that you want to think about in considering that is it sharp? Is your knife sharp? Now, I've got a whole video on how to tell if your knife is sharp, but really quickly, I think the best way to tell if your knife is sharp is the wood test. And the way you do that is you take your knife, you cut at an angle across the end of the wood, or maybe straight across the grain at the top like that. And if your knife is sharp, it'll be like this. You can see how smooth that is. It feels smooth to the touch. Okay, it almost looks burnished. That is a sharp knife. Contrast that with something like this, and an Opinel knife, like I have one here, it can carve well. This is just the knife I have lying around that I know is not sharp right now. Look at those lines that it leaves in it. Or if I try to go across the grain, I can just tell it's harder. It's leaving those lines. it needs to be sharpened up. Now, it might be more subtle than that. It might just be cloudy. That means that it's breaking the wood instead of cutting through the wood. And so I think that's the easiest way to tell if your knife is sharp. But you might still be thrown off because maybe you don't know if your wood is good or things like that. So a couple other things to consider if you're still struggling to tell if your knife is the problem, if your knife is sharp. So another thing to think about is, where did you get it? Did you buy your knife from a reputable knife maker? Maybe you bought it directly from a knife maker. Maybe you bought it from a wood carving show. Maybe you bought it from a wood carving shop online. These are good places to buy knives, right? Maybe you bought it on Amazon. Well, what kind of knife is it? That's another thing to think about. Is it a knife that's a brand that people generally recommend? The nice thing about FlexCut, and the reason that I always recommend them for beginners, is you can buy them on Amazon and they come razor sharp. So at least you know, if you've bought a new knife from FlexCut, you know you've got a sharp knife right off the bat. And that's going to be true for pretty much any of those knives that you buy from those locations. But if you buy a no-name knife off of Amazon or eBay, it might not come sharp, or you might need to do some research to find out, does this brand come sharp, or am I going to have to sharpen it? It would be extreme to buy a new knife to be sure you have a sharp knife. You could do that, but it would be a good idea to try your knife and figure out, where did you get it? Did it come from a reputable place? Should it be sharp? The other thing to think about is, how does it compare to other knives? Have you considered that? What you say, maybe I've only got one knife, so I can't compare it, and that's completely fair. But two things. One, maybe you can find somebody who's got a knife you could borrow and try. The other is that I would give it the side-by-side test with a utility blade. Now, if you're going to whittle with a utility blade, I would suggest you use something like this with a locking mechanism. It's a little bit safer. But if you just want to compare to a sharp knife, a utility blade will actually pass that sharpness test. The average utility blade, as long as it's not rusted out or really well worn, it's going to make nice clean cuts, and it'll pass that sharpness test. So if you're not sure how to compare it, think about, if you've got a utility blade, you could try that as a point of comparison and see how does that perform. And if the utility blade is performing better than your knife, then your knife may not be sharp. And then the last thing to think about is just, is it the right knife? So you might have a sharp knife, but you might have the wrong knife for the job, right? Here's a really delicate knife that if I'm trying to make really big, I'm not even going to do it. I don't want to force it because I don't want to break it. This is a really delicate knife, but if I'm trying to make really big cuts with this little knife or with the tip of this knife, I'm going to be disappointed. I'm going to maybe break my blade, or I'm going to have trouble making clean cuts because it's the wrong knife for the job. Similarly, here's another knife. This is a great knife, very thick blade for making very big cuts, right? But if I'm trying to make really small cuts, it's a thicker blade, so it's going to kind of break the wood. You see how the wood kind of splinters more when I do that, and I might struggle to make cleaner cuts if I'm trying to make finer cuts with a really thick, big blade. So think about that a little bit. What's the makeup of your blade? And if you've only got one, then try to get a nice all-around blade that's got a good thinness, a good length for both roughing and details, and a nice thin pointed blade. Again, I've got another video on how to select a knife. So hopefully you can think about those things and start to discern, is my knife the problem? So the next thing to think about is my wood the problem? And the most important thing I can say to think about here is, where did you get it? If you're struggling to know if your wood is good or bad, think about, where did you get it? And the best thing to do, if you can, is to buy wood from a vendor selling wood specifically for wood carving. There's plenty of good online wood carving shops. If you do a little searching, you can find. Look for recommendations in different social media groups. Ask around if you know other people who carve. Where do they get their wood? But buy wood from somebody who's selling wood specifically for carving, and that's the best way to know if your wood is not going to have a problem if you're not experienced in selecting and harvesting and all of that. So two caveats with that. One is if you buy wood off of Amazon. Just like random carving wood on Amazon, it's going to be pretty hit or miss. The other thing is that if you buy wood from a hardware store or a big hobby shop, they might have a little bag of wood that says it's for carving, and oftentimes that wood is pretty hard. It's been sitting around for a while, and it doesn't always carve very well. So again, the best thing to do is just to try to buy wood from a place that is recommended. But maybe you can't do that. So other things to think about are, what kind of wood is it? You generally, as a beginner, and most carvers in general, carve a lot of basswood. And I don't have a lot of other wood lying around here to show you, but be aware that some woods that are harder, maple is a very hard wood, walnut, cherry, tend to be harder, more brittle types of woods that are going to be harder for you to carve. More common wood for carving is basswood. In addition to that, maybe pine, some aspen, birch, poplar, things like that. But knowing what kind of wood and avoiding really, really hard or brittle woods is important if you're a beginner trying to figure out, is the wood the thing that's a challenge. The other thing is, have you compared it to other wood? Have you tried wood from a few different sources? Here's a piece of wood that I have that has some blemishes on it. And when I carve it, I realize that it's breaking off in multiple places. Not surprising based on how it looks, right? So I can see blemishes on it. I can probably tell that there's going to be challenges with carving on it. But have you compared it to other wood? And again, that might be challenging. You might not be able to shop around a lot, but if you can, try wood from a few different places. Even if you just buy a cheap piece of pine from your hardware store as a comparison, or a wooden dowel from your hardware store as a comparison. Compare it, and that gives you a sense of, oh, actually this is not so bad, or this carves pretty poorly. And then the other thing is, have you tried softening the wood? Now, this is tricky because I haven't actually done any of these things. But if you really can't get different types of wood to try and compare it, and you don't have a lot of sources, a lot of carvers do things to soften their wood. Either spraying the wood with 50-50 water and rubbing alcohol, or put it in overnight, I've heard, with a damp towel in a Tupperware container or something like that. People do that and report success on it. It's not something I do. I generally just deal with the wood that I have, and have been pretty happy with what I've gotten, because I generally buy wood from places that are for carving. But if you're in a spot, you could try that and compare it to the wood and see how that goes. So that's how to think about wood and trying to identify if the wood is the problem. So the last thing to think about in trying to diagnose it is, am I the problem? Am I the one maybe that is the reason that I'm not getting clean cuts? And so I'm going to ask you to take a long, hard look at yourself in the mirror and think, am I the problem? And that's okay, because we have all been the reason that we're not making good cuts at some point, because you just need experience. And so the first thing to really think about is, how long have I been carving? Have I been carving? Have I just started carving? Then I can't really expect that I'm going to be making super clean cuts. I showed a couple carvings at the beginning. Like, these are some of my really early carvings from the first couple months of carving. That's fine. That's great. I can tell that I'm not making clean cuts with it, right? But that's because I lacked the experience to do so. And everybody's different. Remember that you're progressing at different levels. Somebody is going to pick up quicker than others. Also, maybe it's not just, oh, I've been carving for 5 years, but if you've been carving for 5 years, but you only carve a couple times a year, that's going to be different than somebody who's been carving for 6 months and carves for 4 hours a day, right? So think about, how long have I been carving, and is that really realistic to expect the results that I'm getting? It's easy to get discouraged when you're a beginner and you're not getting the results that you want, but a lot of times it's just, I need to carve a little bit longer. And so the next few questions are really ways to think about, how do I know if I have enough experience? What does that look like, right? So can I feel the differences in knives and wood? So this is what I mean when I say that, is that over time you'll develop a sense of, oh, I can tell that my knife is going through that pretty easily. I can tell the wood is pretty soft, my knife is pretty sharp, and I can have confidence that I can actually go really deep with some cuts like this. And I can just feel that it's going to be okay with this knife and this piece of wood. that I can do that. Well, I wasn't born with that feel. I got it after hours and hours of carving, right? I can develop that feeling so that when I get to another piece of wood, maybe I realize that I can really only take small shavings like this because the wood's not behaving well, or the knife's not working right, or whatever it is. I can start to develop that feel of, if I try to go deep, that wood is gonna tear off, or my knife's not gonna be able to cut it. So you develop that feel over time, and once you start to develop that sense, that feel of how does my knife feel as it goes through the wood, then you're starting to get enough experience to really tell, is the wood the problem or is the knife of the problem? But you can't do that without hours and hours of carving. The other thing I think about is, have I developed good blade awareness? What I mean by that is I know where the blade is at all times. So if I make a cut from one direction and I come in from the other direction, can I be reasonably confident that they're going to line up and the chip is going to pop out like that? Could I do something like, a simple triangle chip cut where I stick my point in a couple different spots, and then I can pop out a chip with my knife like that on the first try? Those are things that show me that I have good blade awareness. I know where the tip of my knife is in the wood, and I'm putting it at the right depth and things like that. If you're a beginner carver and you haven't carved long, you're going to do things like this where you're going to have a bunch of jagged edges here because your cuts aren't always going to line up with each other, right? So have I developed enough blade awareness to make some of those clean cuts? And if you haven't, then you probably need a little bit more experience, and that is going to be a contributing factor to why you're struggling to get clean cuts, right? The last question to think about is, have I successfully sharpened a knife? If you have never successfully sharpened a knife, then it's possible that you need more experience to be able to tell if your knife is sharp enough. Now, the caveat is if you have a brand new knife that you absolutely know is sharp, that's fine. But if you've got enough experience to know that you can successfully sharpen your knife, and you can watch other videos on how to do that, then that'll help you rule out if it's you, the knife, or the wood. So those are things to get you thinking about where you fall, and we're going to go back to that Venn diagram now and talk about some of the solutions. All right, so we thought about, is your knife sharp? Is the knife the problem? Is your wood the problem? Is your lack of experience the problem, right? Because if you're going to make clean cuts, again, you want to live right here. You want to live in the intersection where you've got a sharp knife, good wood, and experience is going to lead to those clean cuts. So the question is, think about those things, and where do you honestly think that you fall if you're struggling to make clean cuts or the kinds of big cuts that you want to make. Okay, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that if you have enough experience to do some of the things that I listed, that you probably have enough awareness to know that if you're in this zone, you have experience and you have good wood, but you're missing a sharp knife. You probably have enough experience to know that the problem here is that if you're in that zone, you need to sharpen your knife, right? And you probably have enough experience to know that if you know you have a sharp knife, and that your wood is bad, that you need different wood, or that you're just going to struggle. You're just going to struggle with that wood, right? Or, if you're in this category, you need both. You need both to sharpen your knife, and you need wood, right? So if you've got enough experience, you're probably going to be able to figure that out, right? So I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that if you're really struggling to make clean cuts, that you're probably falling in either this section up here, or this section here, or this section here. These are all the sections that don't have enough experience to tell for sure, right? So let's think about this. If you're in this category and your knife is sharp, you know your knife is sharp. Maybe you bought it new or it passed those sharpness tests, you can tell that. But you're not sure about your wood, and you're not sure about your amount of experience. Well, what's your solution going to be? Your solution is going to be, first of all, practice, right? And otherwise, it's going to be try other wood. right? If you can, or maybe try softening techniques. You might be in this category where you know you don't have a whole lot of experience yet, but you're positive you have good wood, or you're at least pretty confident about it. You got it from a good, reliable source. You have somebody who told you that it's good wood, those things. Then your solution, of course, is going to be to sharpen your knife, right? And maybe you're going to have to learn about that, but you're also going to need to practice, right? Because you don't have that experience to tell for sure, right? Then the other possibility is that you're in this range, which is that you have good wood and a sharp knife, but you don't have experience. In that case, what you need is practice. I'll give you an example of that. You know, teaching my daughter how to carve, I give her a good sharp knife, I give her good wood. I know that she knows how to do that. I've done that with several people and sat next to them. They're not making clean cuts because they don't have the experience to do it yet, but they know they have a sharp knife or good wood. So the common denominator, of course, on all of this is practice, right? That if you want to make clean cuts, if you want to know how to make your knife fly through the wood, the biggest thing is practice, because you will develop the experience that you need to tell if your knife is sharp, if your wood is good, and which one of these areas that you fall in. So don't be discouraged if you're having trouble getting the cuts that you want. Hopefully this is a helpful framework for you to think about, where do I fall? Which category am I in here, and what do I need to do to figure that out? But keep at it. Remember that we all start somewhere, and keep going. Happy whittling. Thanks for watching.